"What in the world do you think you're doing, old man? This isn't a park bench." The sharp voice came from Colonel Graves, its impatience sharpened by the authority of a newly polished rank. His uniform was so crisp it seemed to crackle in the afternoon sun as he stood with his hands on his hips, staring down at the elderly groundskeeper. Samuel Finch, dressed in faded blue overalls and a worn flannel shirt at the collar, didn't flinch. His gnarled hands, lined by age and countless repairs, rested gently on the cool metal skin of a decommissioned fighter jet, an ugly, forgotten relic abandoned near the Academy's service entrance. Its paint peeling, its canopy cloudy, and its frame dusted with pollen. Samuel stayed silent, his thumb tracing a faint seam in the fuselage, a familiar gesture repeated countless times before. Graves stepped closer, boots sinking slightly into the manicured lawn. "Did you hear me? This is a restricted area for Academy personnel, not for janitors to take breaks," he snapped, gesturing dismissively at Samuel's attire. The silence that followed was thick and weighted. Slowly, Samuel withdrew his hand and faced the colonel, his pale blue eyes startlingly clear and devoid of fear. They were the eyes of a man who had seen the curve of the earth from 50,000 feet and sunrises over nameless landscapes, though Graves saw only a senile old man ignoring orders. Slapping the jet's wing with a dull thud, Graves scoffed, calling it an eyesore soon to be hauled off for scrap, and ordered Samuel back to work. Samuel's jaw tightened subtly, but he didn't move, his quiet dignity standing firm against the colonel's bluster. The passive defiance infuriated Graves, who felt anger rising as he reached out and grabbed Samuel's arm. The instant the glove touched the cracked leather of Samuel's jacket, the present dissolved. The scent of grass and jet fuel vanished beneath ozone, hot wiring, and the metallic tang of fear. The colonel's grip became the squeeze of a G-suit, and the Colorado sun melted into the star-dusted black of the upper atmosphere. Samuel was no longer an old man. He was a young captain in the cockpit of this very jetback when it was no relic but a living predator, cloaked in secret technology. A voice crackled in his helmet. "Go 7, you have boogies on your 6. And his own younger voice answered, steady and sure. He banked hard, stars streaking past as tracers sliced the darkness, the jet responding like an extension of his own body. Alone in a war no one would ever read about. Flying a machine that didn't officially exist. He glanced at the name he'd once carved into the panel, Ghost 7. The memory consumed him until Graves shook his arm and the vision washed away. Samuel blinked back into the daylight, but something had changed. Gone was the placid calm. In its place burned a diamond-hard intensity, the look of a pilot in the kill zone, a look that had stared down death. For the first time in his career, Colonel Graves felt a sudden, creeping fear. An inexplicable chill ran through Colonel Graves, and he instinctively let go of the old man's arm. Across the parade ground, Cadet Eva Rostova watched the encounter with growing curiosity. She was supposed to be studying flight dynamics, but the quiet tension surrounding the forgotten jet was far more compelling. She saw Colonel Graves, famous for his rigid adherence to protocol and quick temper confronting a campus groundskeeper. It was the old man's stillness that drew her in. He stood like a weathered oak while the colonel buzzed around him like an irritated hornet. She watched Graves grab the old man's arm, then release it just as quickly and step back. The expression on his face shifted into something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't just anger anymore. There was confusion, maybe even fear. Flustered and irritated by his own reaction, Graves regained his composure and barked into his shoulder radio for security, claiming a civilian trespasser. Within moments, 2 young airmen arrived on a small electric cart, glancing uncertainly between the imposing colonel and the frail old man. When Graves ordered them to take Samuel to the security office and remind him of the rules, Samuel didn't resist. He cast one last long, meaningful look at the jet, filled with unspoken history, then allowed the airmen to lead him away. As they drove off, Ava felt an impulse she couldn't explain. She walked to the old jet, now the center of all this sudden drama. Up close, it looked even worse: pitted metal, scarred surfaces, weeds curling around the landing gear. A sad fate for a machine meant to soar. She ran her hand along the fuselage, feeling the cool metal beneath her fingers, then circled around to the cockpit and peered through the fogged canopy. Inside, the cockpit was stripped bare, an empty shell. Her eyes followed the frame of the canopy, and that's when she noticed it. Faint scratches hidden under grime and faded by decades of exposure. They weren't manufacturer marks, they were personal. She rubbed away some dirt, and the light caught the etching just right, revealing 2 words: Ghost 7. The name sent a strange shiver through her. It sounded like something from a novel, not a military designation. Driven by curiosity, Ava pulled out her Academy-issued datapad and searched the archives for Ghost 7. Nothing. She checked the Academy's historical database, still nothing. Undeterred, she accessed a deeper restricted network reserved for research. When she typed the call sign again, the system hesitated before revealing a single file: Project Phantom Wing. The document was mostly blacked out, but fragments remained. 7 experimental radar-absorbent reconnaissance aircraft, operated under deep cover during the Meridian conflict. All pilots volunteers. All official records scrubbed. Her pulse quickened. She scrolled to a short list. Ghosts 1 through 6 were marked as decommissioned or lost in training accidents. But next to Ghost 7, one entry stood apart. Status: Mia, presumed lost over contested territory. Pilot: Captain Samuel Finch. Ava's breath caught as she looked from the name glowing on her security card carrying the old groundskeeper, Samuel Finch. It couldn't be. A ghost, a living legend presumed dead for half a century, was quietly tending the lawns of the very institution that had forgotten him. She knew with absolute certainty that she couldn't let this stand. Colonel Graves had made a terrible mistake, and she was the only one who knew the truth. She bypassed the entire chain of command, her fingers flying across her datapad as she composed a short, urgent message, attached the screenshot of the declassified file fragment, and sent it directly to the one person on base who might understand: General Sterling, the Academy Commandant. Inside the sterile beige security office, Colonel Graves paced, relishing the final act of his little power play. Samuel Finch sat quietly on a metal chair, his hands resting on his knees, while the 2 young airmen stood awkwardly by the door, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. "You have to understand, old-timer," Graves lectured, "that rules are what separate us from chaos. An institution like this cannot function if everyone wanders wherever they please. It's about respecting boundaries, respecting authority." Samuel simply watched him with an unreadable expression. He had faced interrogators far more menacing than this puffed-up officer. Survived years in a place where a single word could mean death. And the colonel's lecture was nothing more than a fly buzzing in a hurricane. Suddenly, the office door flew open with such force it slammed against the wall, rattling framed pictures. 4-star General Sterling stood in the doorway, his face a thundercloud of controlled fury. He didn't even glance at Graves. His sharp eyes scanned the room and locked onto the old man. Every ounce of anger drained from the general's face, replaced by awe and profound respect. He strode forward, stopped in front of Samuel, and delivered a salute so precise it was a work of art. "Captain Finch," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It is an honor, sir." Colonel Graves froze mid-stride, mouth hanging open, while the airmen snapped to attention, staring between the highest-ranking officer on base and the old man in overalls receiving his salute. Graves stammered, insisting Samuel was a civilian employee, but General Sterling turned and gave him a look cold enough to freeze fire. "Colonel, do you have any idea who you are talking to?" Without waiting for a reply, he addressed Samuel again. "We thought you were gone, sir. Your file is the stuff of legend." He turned to the room, voice rising with reverence. This man, whom you treated with such disrespect, is Captain Samuel Finch, the 7th pilot in the top-secret Phantom Wing program. He flew a plane that technically didn't exist, in a war that was never declared. He pointed toward the forgotten jet outside. That piece of junk you wanted to scrap is Ghost 7, the only surviving prototype of the aircraft that became the foundation of our stealth program. It was recovered from a jungle ravine 20 years ago, long after we thought it lost. The color drained from Graves' face. Sterling continued, explaining that Finch had been shot down behind enemy lines. Spent 4 brutal years in a prison camp. Never broke, never gave up his country or his unit. And upon repatriation had his existence classified and was given a new identity. He chose a quiet job near his plane rather than retirement. He has worked on this base for 30 years, Sterling said. He never asked for recognition. He just wanted to be home. Silence fell. Graves, feeling his rank like a cheap costume, finally saw the man before him, the steady eyes of a captain, the hands that once held the fate of a nation. He stepped forward, stammering an apology, but Samuel raised a hand to signal to the airmen escorting the old man away.